I'm Nancy Toff, and I'm the president of the New York Flute Club, and I welcome you to a conversation with Bonita Boyd, professor of flute at the Eastman School of Music, and Samuel Adler, a composer who has worked with her and with many other flutists over many years. And we're going to talk about his contributions to the flute literature. So let's start with you, Bonnie. Tell us why you wanted to organize this program and how your working relationship with Sam has began.
Of course. Well, so it's very simple. Samuel Adler is one of the great American composers of all time. And he has contributed so much to our repertoire that I felt that, and I've longed so many times to hear, if I could only hear what a given composer really thought about the music he wrote, or what he really wanted from the performers, or what he hoped to get, all those kinds of things. If we could have that, wouldn't that be an incredible gold mine? So since I've had this wonderful gift of a relationship with Samuel Adler for most of my career, actually, I really wanted to highlight him, honor him, and give this gift of having him speak about his music to the whole flute field and the flute world forever and ever. So that's the whole purpose, and it was a big one, actually. And as far as the beginning of our relationship, the part that I remember the most at the very beginning was that Samuel Adler asked me to teach his daughter flute when I had no teaching experience. I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt like such a novice, and I just could not believe somebody of the importance of Samuel Adler would ask me to teach his incredibly gifted daughter. So that was a wonderful thing. We had many, many years actually together before she went off to college and went to Northwestern and continued. So that was the beginning of our relationship, and it continued. We'll talk later probably about the concerto and so on. So
we will. So Sam, what do you like about writing for the flute? Are there particular challenges, particular opportunities?
Well, in the first place, I like flutists, and because there's always such virtuosity, even in student flutists, they are very much into the idea of virtuosity, and it seems that we have more excellent flute performers than on most instruments. I'm not a woodwind player, I'm a string player, but I've always loved the flute. And of course, as Bonnie said, my daughter is a flutist. And the idea is also for a composer to write for an instrument that wasn't overly popular with people in the past, that is, the great composers. Of course, you do have a flute sonata of Beethoven, but you don't have flute music by Schumann or Mendelssohn or Brahms and so on. You have a lot of arrangements of things. Like, I hate for people to play, since I'm a violinist, that everybody plays the Franck sonata on the flute. And I mean, don't you have enough to play music that is written for flute? Then, but the idea of writing for flute is because the instrument just appeals to me. And I've had wonderful experiences, not only with the instrument, but with flutists. It's been a most satisfying experience to write for the flute and to write for so many excellent flutists.
So I think the first solo flute work you wrote was called Flaunting, and it was written for George Morey in 1965. How did that come about?
Well, actually, only the flute part was written for George, who was a colleague of mine at the University of North Texas, where I was teaching from 57 to 66. He was also a composer, and they had a woodwind quintet there. He was the flutist of the woodwind quintet. They had just played a piece of mine called Entrada. And he said, why don't you write something for flute? Well, the oboist and I have a senior moment, I've forgotten his name, but he was a doubler. And so I wrote 4 pieces: flaunting, oboration, clarion, and bassoonery. Uh, and and those 4 pieces are still played a great deal because there's so little music like that. Because this oboist would record the oboe or the flute piece or the clarinet piece, the bassoon piece, and then play it against contrabassoon or alto flute, so everything would be in fourths and things like that. And he would take it around to schools to show, how different instruments work. And that was a wonderful experience. And he did it for a long time. And as a matter of fact, somebody, everything is on YouTube these days. Somebody just recorded the 4 pieces with all the other instruments. And it sounds really very, very contemporary, since they're in fifths and in fourths, which you shouldn't do, but it sounds great.
Good. So then in 1981, you wrote the Solo Sonata for James Galway. Tell us how that came about.
Well, of course, he was for 1 semester only a member of the faculty at Eastman, and I was at that time the chairman of the department, of the composition department. And we saw each other in the hall one day, and he said, "You've never written a sonata for flute." I said, "No, I haven't. Why don't you write one for me? Don't make it too difficult." Well, I wrote it, and I went to his studio, and I said, Jim, you don't have to play your body march, whatever that's called, uh, at every concert as an encore. I wrote it into it. And he said, "Gee, I didn't realize it." So he played the last movement and said, "Oh, that's right. Now I don't have to play it anymore." Well, he did play it at the Seattle convention. And after that, he didn't play it anymore. And one day I saw him in London, and I said, "Why aren't you playing my piece?" He said, "It's too difficult, and I don't like to practice these days." So that's the end of that. My relationship with Jimmy Galway. Although Philip Ball, who is his accompanist, is a very close friend of mine, since I did a lot of teaching in Berlin, and we became really close friends. He's been arguing with Galway to play my sonata, but he is now, I think, into his later years and plays only the music he's always played very well.
Okay. Okay. So Bonnie, you premiered Sam's Flute Concerto in Rochester in 1977, I think. Tell us how that went.
Well, that was exciting. So the first thing I remember is Sam handing me the score and saying, now you'll notice that the third movement is upside down from the Mozart G major scherzo, the minuet, the third movement of the Mozart G. And indeed, it's inverted. It's really adorable. And the premiere was actually conducted by Sarah Caldwell. That was pretty rare. She had been up at, made her kind of name at the opera in Boston. And so that was an experience. It was televised, a wide, actually PBS special, and it was quite a big event. And it's very difficult. Sam's work is always very difficult. Sam, everybody says the same about your music.
Purpose.
It's very hard. You have to practice. You must practice. And so it's an absolutely beautiful piece. I think my favorite part of the concerto is actually there's an unaccompanied slow soliloquy in the middle. So Sam called it a cadenza, but it's absolutely, I love that section of the piece. It's all a wonderful piece. The orchestra is very large. And so, it's that sometimes has made it difficult to get it programmed, but it's worth it. But everybody's part is very hard.
Very nice of you to say.
So Sam, when you wrote the piece, did you have Bonnie's sound in mind?
Yes, I always write for the person. I never write anything for anybody that hasn't sent me some kind of a recording so I can hear, because I think in the sound of a person on any instrument, you sort of, at least I feel, a personality. And I have to tell you a story that I was studying with Hindemith, and I had writer's block. Well, for Hindemith, there was no such thing. He could write a piece anytime, any place. And he didn't understand writer's block, so he threw me out if I didn't bring a piece at every lesson. And one day, after twice being thrown out, I said, please, I call on you to have pity on me. So he said, well, how do you write? And I told him I sit down at the desk and sketch. He said, oh, how boring. The way to write is the phone rings and it's Jascha Heifetz. In that way, everybody in those days knew who Jascha Heifetz was. And Jascha Heifetz says, next week I'm giving a recital in Town Hall. I'd like you to have a sonata for me for that occasion. And he hangs up. Now you can say, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Heifetz, I have writer's block. Or you can say, well, it's Heifetz, I have to write a piece. So you stand up and you see Heifetz, and you see, and you're a fiddle player, he said, you know how he plays, and you think of it, and you say, you write that down, and in an hour you have a piece. And I've never forgotten that, because it is true that a composer, well, look, the great composers of the past have written for people. You know, Brahms was inspired by a clarinetist. At the end of his life, the last two pieces he wrote were two clarinet sonatas and a clarinet quintet. Not shabby pieces, because he was inspired by that clarinetist. And I've always felt that that's the way I want to write for people who ask me to write.
All right, so your next piece after that, your next big flute piece, was the sonata that Juilliard commissioned you to write for its centennial in 2005, which I was privileged to hear Carol Winsent's play. Tell us what you had in mind when you wrote for Carol.
Well, that's exactly how I felt. Carol was my colleague at the time at Juilliard, and we had worked together on a few other projects. And I pictured her playing the piece. And I feel that it was written with her personality and her sound in mind. And I try to do that because I feel that if somebody asks me to write, it is for them. And even though, we know that Brahms wrote those clarinet sonatas for a certain clarinetist, but everybody plays them because they're written for a clarinetist. And so there is that clarinety personality in them. Now, of course, now they're for viola also. And as a matter of fact, the F minor sonata, I have made a concerto out of it. So now there is a Brahms viola concerto.
Wow. So
which is one of my most played pieces because it's by Brahms,
So there's probably no better example of a piece written for a particular flutist than a Bonnie tune. So Bonnie, tell us where a Bonnie tune came from.
Well, that was a big surprise for me. So behind my back, they had planned this. My husband actually was involved in that at the time. It planned this big celebration for 35 years of teaching at Eastman, if you can believe it. And they commissioned Sam to write this piece, this unaccompanied piece. So everything was a big surprise. So there was this big dinner. I almost didn't dress up. There were some people staying with me and we were going to be going. They knew where we were going, but I had no idea. They said we were going somewhere. And then I just came out in some old dress and they said, no, don't you have something like really, really nice? And I said, why would we need something really, really nice? And I just could not understand it. It wasn't until we got outside, I said, where are we going? And then finally we come in there and all these people are there, including Sam and his wife, which was so wonderful. And so a Bonnie tune had been commissioned as a big surprise for that occasion. And Mindy Kaufman, who was an early, at Eastman with me early on, premiered it. So it was really a great fun and great occasion. And I think you'd have to ask Sam what he was thinking about when he wrote it, because that is a mystery to me. So
that was my next question. So Sam, what were you thinking?
Well, that's easy to answer because I've known Bonnie since she was 17. And I've always known her as being not only friendly, but overly so. It's always wonderful to be in her company because that friendliness comes through. And of course, I know her virtuosity. You can write anything for her and she can play it. And the thing is that her personality is absolutely winning. When she comes into a room, it's like the sun coming up. And I felt that this little tune says something about that.
Good. All right.
That's
nice. A good answer, and I cannot argue with any of that. So, Sam, your latest piece is very different. Your latest piece for solo flute, it's called Alone Together, and it was written during this pandemic, so a very different mood. You did that for Mimi Stillman.
Well, Mimi, has a podcast or whatever they call it almost every day. She plays. And I think this is such a wonderful idea because to me, music is the most satisfying thing when you're alone. And that's why I felt I've listened to her and we were in touch. My youngest daughter lives in Philadelphia. And so I knew that Mimi was always doing these things. And one day I listened to her podcast and she had written that she is looking for new pieces. And I got in touch with her and she said, I would love to have you write something for me. And I feel this is a piece that's quite peaceful with a different EA. And we need that in this hour, which is so different from anything else I've experienced in my very long life. This last year was something really out of the ordinary, and I feel this piece fits into our feelings of both loneliness and being together on something like we're just on this technology of Zoom, which makes us together even though we're far apart.
So, Bonnie, what does this piece say to you?
Well, it's very contemplative and, almost musing, sometimes thinking, and I have no idea if I'm even close to what Sam was thinking, or feeling, but it has a very great piece about it. And yet then there'll be these little, kind of staccato motives, which it's almost for me like a little doodling, like, I wonder about this. I'm thinking about this right now. And then it will come back and be a little developed. And so it continually, changed that way. And at the very end, of course, there's this wonderful last note, which has all this hope in it. So that to me just spoke. It's going to be all right. It's going to turn and it will be made into good somehow. And that's the way it felt. So I was honored that Sam asked me to play it. I'm very, very delighted to be able to play it.
I'm delighted you're playing it.
Delighted to hear it today. And I understand from Danny Dorff that it will be published by Theodore Presser in June. So
very soon.
Everybody will be able to play it. So that's great. So Sam, what is next for flute?
I don't know. If somebody asks me, it'll be next.
All right, well, we will find out.
I'm happy to say these days I have only time to write pieces that I'm asked for. As a matter of fact, I've written 3 organ pieces lately because 3 organists just said we've got to have a piece for such and such an event. As a matter of fact, the next organ piece is going to be premiered next week. So I don't want to write another organ piece for a little while.
All right.
That's enough. As a matter of fact, one of them is for 2 organists at the same. At Eastman, my studio was on the 4th floor, and so was the organ department. And so every morning at 7 o'clock, when I came to school, all the organists came because there were only so many organs to practice on. And so therefore I've made lots of connections all besides the flute world in the organ world. Also, I've written a lot of sacred music, so that counts too.
Right.
I don't know what the next flute piece will be. Whatever. There is a new piece for woodwind quintet, which hopefully will be premiered next month.
Wow. Very good. Bonnie,
I have
any closing thoughts? Yes.
Yes, I have a question I've always wanted to ask. And Sam, when you compose something and then you turn it over to a performer, anyone, and do you wish that you could control the performance, that you could have certain things happen that you really want to have happen? Or do you feel you turn this over, it's no longer yours, it's now in the hands of the performer, and you wait to be surprised to see what's going to come out of them? I just always wondered this. How do you feel about that?
I would say it's the latter, that I want to be, but you can only trust a performer that really can look into the music. For instance, I just got a performance of a new piece that I feel is completely wrong. And it's very difficult after it's been performed to correct the performer. I would rather, and now what I've learned is I have the performer send me a trial performance that we can talk about. I'm not going to say, you idiot, you didn't write it correctly, you didn't play it correctly, but I would like to have some input, especially in tempo, because a lot of people, metronome marking doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. And it is that which sometimes really makes a piece sound much different than it was intended.
That's very interesting. And what about your other kind of markings? What if a performer were to change a dynamic, or how do you feel about things like that?
I leave that up to the performer a little bit, because everybody has a different feel about what piano should be, what forte should be. And that I don't think makes the piece feel differently as much as the tempo. I just got a recording of an orchestra piece from South America, and you really can't recognize it because it's so slow that it doesn't mean anything,
Right,
So that,
right.
but what can you say? Once it's performed and they think it's so great, you have to be very careful because the ego is right there.
Right.
And,
What do you make out of, because you studied with Hindemith and knew him? So the Metamorphosis, the movement with the big flute solo in it,
yeah.
is marked at 126, and the original performance, which Hindemith conducted, barely made it to 100. How do you account for that? I'm not going to say anything. What do you think about that?
I really think that Hindemith was too nice to them. Because I think so. He was so strict with his students, and I don't know. He had such a wonderful relationship with the Berlin Philharmonic and recorded all of his orchestra pieces. Most of them are really great. Now, I haven't heard the Metamorphosis, but it's so common now to be played by any, or even youth orchestras, that I'm surprised that I haven't heard his performance, so I can't
I just,
comment on
yeah,
it.
it's very interesting. We always wonder about things like that, especially such
Yeah,
a big
and he was so
solo.
strict. He was so strict on most of the things, and you know, he recorded a lot of his own music on the viola, and it is absolutely correct with the metronome.
Interesting, interesting. Maybe he changed his mind about the character. Who knows?
Maybe, or maybe it was too fast. You know, that's
Maybe
awfully fast. 126.
extreme. Oh, it's extremely difficult at that
Yeah,
tempo.
sure.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
thank you.
he was of course. I think he was also a very very strict uh, on himself. You know, he was so disciplined. He worked every day, and when he didn't work on that, he would paint or do arithmetic, which he loved. He was a terrific painter. So was Schoenberg, you know, and so was Mendelssohn, by the way, who was a great watercolorist.
I didn't know
Interesting.
that. That's like, do you paint?
I do not. No, no. I read a lot, but I don't paint.
Bonnie,
My sister is painter.
Bonnie, do you have any closing words of wisdom for us?
I have to think about that. I think I'm just thrilled that we could bring this to pass. Combination of being able to talk with the composer and then play his works, show his work, and when a composer is so very important in the I think in the history of American music, frankly. So I'm very very thrilled that we could bring this about and have the pleasure to talk to Sam himself.
Well, thank you
And
both on behalf of the Flute Club. And in our newsletter this month, we have a list of many more of Sam's works so that flutists and lovers of the flute can hear much more.
I
Thank you
thank you
both.
so much. Thank you.
thank you, Nancy. Great, you did a great interview.
Wonderful.